Okay, great. Again, welcome everybody. These are just a few things that you need to know. The video speaking and screen sharing functions are not available to you. We are doing this in a webinar format. And the reason why we're doing that is because we've had some Zoom bombing incidents in the past that we don't want to repeat. But you will have an opportunity to be able to, with the team, you can do that through the Q&A function down at the bottom, and I'll go over that in just a moment. You can also virtually raise your hand and we'll call on you and allow you to speak. You can leave and rejoin this meeting at any time unless you are removed for inappropriate behavior or we're at capacity. If we hope it never comes to anybody being removed for inappropriate behavior. Let's see, you can communicate through the Q&A feature, as I mentioned, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. All of this will also be posted on the project website, which is up here on the screen, a2gov.org/rescue funds. Welcome, John. All right, moving ahead. All right, so the technology overview is fairly simple. I think many people are used to Zoom at this point, but in case you're not, there is a raise your hand function at the bottom of the page. So if you click on that, we'll look to see, and if your hand is raised, then we'll give you a call and allow you to speak. You can also use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of the page and where you can type in a question and we'll respond either verbally or through writing. If you are on the phone, you can press *9, which will virtually raise your hand, and we'll let you know that we see you and we'll call on you and you'll be able to speak. Oops. All right, we'd like to do a demographic poll for all of our sessions. We started collecting this demographic information about 1.5 years ago to understand who we're reaching through our engagement activities so we can have an understanding of who we're not reaching, and so we can do a better job at that. So I'm going to launch the poll right now. And we'll just pause here for a moment, and we ask that you take the poll to help us get a sense of who's attending this meeting. It is anonymous and it is completely optional, but we do hope you take it so we can continue gathering as much information as possible so that we can have a better insight in how we do a better job at engaging people. So I'll give you just a moment for that. Next, I'll leave that going for a little bit while I move on to our next couple of slides that provide an overview. So this is our typical meeting norms. We ask that people are nice to each other, basically, that you treat each other respectfully. So basically, we'd like you to commit to learning and avoid speculation. We really do want you to ask questions so you have a full understanding of the projects that are being presented today and the process in general. We also ask that if you're speaking over the phone or even over the computer, if you can move to a quiet place. I know that's not always easy with kids and pets and other things around us. So we just ask that you do the best you can so we can hear you. We really do want to hear you. And again, we do ask that you respect each other. And with that, we're asked that you critique ideas, not people, no name calling, and to be very thoughtful about your language so that this can feel like an inclusive, safe space for people. And this gets into the overview of what are the American Rescue Funds. So basically it is a response from our federal government to address the pandemic and the financial losses that occurred doing that. Ann Arbor, our city, received $24.2 million. And the program is modeled after the Community Development Block Grant funding, if you're familiar with that. This funding is very particular. There are a lot of regulations to it, to how it can be spent. These are the 4 main buckets of how it can be spent. So negative economic impacts, premium pay for eligible workers, government services to the extent of the loss of revenue, and investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And again, there's a lot of detail to this. We had an initial presentation last week, and there is a recording of that that's on the website that gives a little bit of a deeper explanation of all of this. But generally speaking, these are the 4 buckets of money pots that can be used for this. And then just some other information about ARPA funds. The period that it covers is from March 3rd, 2021 to December 31st, 2024. And that cost can be incurred before December 31st, 2024, but must be spent by 2026. So that's a really important note there, that it has to be spent on a project by 2026, which adds some limitation to the projects that we can do. The prohibited uses include pension contribution and debt payments. It may not be used for a federal match, and there are significant reporting requirements. Federal funds, or these ARPA funds, are also temporary in nature. So we're taking a lot of care to avoid creating new programs that require an ongoing financial commitment. How the projects were identified. So the projects that we're going over, the two today are related to affordable housing. We reviewed the federal guidelines, and then we reviewed prior council direction and identified projects that could be spent down before the 2026 deadline. So basically it's a combination of the federal guidelines with projects that really were already coming on deck that had gone through a process, either a planning process, and were already approved in some way as projects that we want to move forward with. All right, so that brings us to Jen. And I'm going to end the poll, the demographic poll. Thank you for all of you who took the poll. We really appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about the two projects that are up here.
Thanks, Heather. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
It sure is. Yeah. Actually, I think I need to do one little thing for you to do that. All right, you should be able to do that now.
I'm actually going to do a quick slide presentation, some of which I'm going to skip over. Oops. Beginning, sorry about that. My name is Jennifer Hall. I'm the director of the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. I want to kind of give a broader picture of the housing situation and then talk about why this particular project came up. And for the second project, Aubrey Patino from Avalon Housing, the director of Avalon Housing, will also be answering questions for the second project. Just to give the sort of the big picture of what is affordable housing, it's generally considered that if you pay 30% of your household's gross income or less, including utilities or whether you're a homeowner or a renter, then that's an affordable range of housing. And the newer sort of definition from a planner's perspective is that people find that as you have a community that's not affordable, people live farther and farther away. So if you add transportation costs to housing costs, you wouldn't want your total cost to exceed 45% of your household income. Otherwise, you're considered cost burdened. And this can be any income. It doesn't mean you have to be low income. It can be all types of incomes. How is Ann Arbor's residents impacted by the housing market? The latest financial information we have from HUD related to the median income. The median income for households in Ann Arbor as well as Washtenaw County, it's the same primary statistical area, is $106,600. I was just looking at some of my presentations from a couple of years ago, and even in 2019, it was $92,000. So it's gone up significantly, even in the last 3 or 4 years. So when you compare that to the United States, the area median income is $79,900 compared to Ann Arbor. This is just a chart that HUD publishes for programs that are eligible for different types of affordable housing funds. I'm going to go through these quickly, but people can ask questions and I can always come back to them. When you translate those numbers into rents or housing cost, this is about where you end up. So the city's main target for households related to anything that the city develops is 60% of median income or less. And you may be surprised at how high the total housing costs are for a one-person household at that level, and that relates back to how high the incomes are in the city of Ann Arbor. This shows just a chart comparing the Ann Arbor's household income compared to the United States. You're not going to be able to see the details other than if you look at the very lowest end, you'll see in red that the city appears to have a lot of households that are in, the very lowest of incomes, under $10,000. But when you look at poverty by age, you'll see that the vast majority of people who appear to be in poverty from a household income standpoint, which is self-reported on the census, are people in the age of 18 to 24 and 25 to 34, which is reflective of the high number of students that we have in our community. So when you actually look at how many low-income households that aren't students, it's not that many. And that even shows up in our poverty census tracts. So if you look at the purple census tracts, those are high poverty census tracts in the county, and they very much track in Ann Arbor with University of Michigan housing, and in parts of Ypsilanti with EMU and Washtenaw Community College. And then the rest of the high poverty census tracts are actually in Ypsi Township and Ypsi City, none of which are actually in Ann Arbor. If you look at our property values compared to the United States, you can see in red, a very high proportion of our properties are in the $200,000 to $750,000 range compared to the United States. Why does that happen? It's really a function of supply and demand. It's pretty simple. How does that impact residents or people who work in the city of Ann Arbor? There's about 84,000 people who actually commute into the city for their job. Obviously, post-COVID, that's changed. I haven't seen the numbers since then, but prior to COVID, and about 25,000 people live and work in Ann Arbor, and about 21,000 live in Ann Arbor and commute outside to a job outside of Ann Arbor. It's very much impacted by our employers. By far, the largest employer is the University of Michigan and the University of Michigan health system, dwarfing, the next 15 employers by far. And as a employer, the University of Michigan is impacted not just by they obviously have their whole health system with all kinds of different jobs there, but also impacted by enrollment at the University of Michigan. This last year had the highest enrollment. This is a little bit dated, but the reported enrollment for University of Michigan of accepted freshmen was the highest ever in this last year. And that impacts not just the number of students that are by their nature need to live in and around and close to where campus is, but also all of the jobs that have to be hired to support the student population. The city did a housing needs assessment of the downtown area, not including campus, but from State Street on to the west. And this was in 2020. And what they found was that there's a demand for 1,300 to 1,400 units under 30% of median income, 780 to 850 units between 31 and 60% AMI, and about 370 to 490 at the 61 to median income. So basically a total of over 1,800 demand for additional housing. In addition, in 2015, the county and the city did a affordable and economic equity analysis. And what we found in that study was a highly segregated county. And the study made recommendations for different parts of the county, but one of the recommendations for the city of Ann Arbor was to increase the number of rental housing units that are affordable to 60% AMI households that were not students, to the tune of 140 units a year, which equaled about 2,800 units over 20 years. One of the problems in the community right now is not just adding affordable housing, but losing affordable housing. And so this is just a chart of housing that used to be restricted by income and by rent that have got to the end of their compliance period based on the type of funding that was used to actually build the units. And so we've lost, just in a few years, almost 1,000 units. So we're not even close to keeping up. I have some other slides, but I'm actually going to stop there, and I can use the other slides to help answer questions. I just also want to point out that the city of Ann Arbor did adopt a millage in November of 2020, which will raise approximately $6.5 million a year for affordable housing. That's incredible, super helpful, super useful in moving us forward toward adding affordable housing to the community. But it's simply going to be gap financing. It's in no way able to provide all of the funding to build all the affordable housing that's needed, but it does provide what we call gap financing that we leverage with other funding sources to do affordable housing. And even with the city's millage, we still will not meet the demand nor the target that we're looking for just with the millage funds. And so that is why I'm requesting through the ARPA process that some of the funds be set aside for acquisition of an existing housing that is out there or existing property that is out there. And I will stop there, Heather, and see what questions there are.
Okay, great. And you can submit questions once again through the Q&A feature at the bottom, and I'll read it out loud and a team member can answer that. Or if you have questions, you can raise your hand virtually by hitting the hand at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone, I don't actually see anybody on the phone, but in case you get booted off and have to rejoin by phone, *9. And as I'm scrolling through the list of participants, I see that Councilmember Griswold and Councilmember Song are both here in attendance, so welcome. And I see a hand is up. Glenn, please feel free to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Did I do the right thing?
You did, yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I want to make 3 points and then I will have a brief concluding comment. The first point is I strongly urge supportive services to be included in the housing package. And while I know these are needed, I will largely leave the specifics up to those who are expert in affordable and supportive housing. However, I will note that isolation is a major problem that is leading to the onset of poor mental health and to the worsening of mental health conditions prior to the pandemic. So I would hope that these services would, in part, be organized and designed to reduce the isolation of people. The second point I want to make is that I urge the people making the decisions on programs to include services and facilities for children and the parents of children in affordable and supportive housing. Children and youth have had a major negative experience because of the pandemic, and we need to help them. And again, isolation is one of the problems. So I would urge things like attention to nice playgrounds, arrangements with Parks and Recreation Department and with Rec and Ed from the school district for nearby recreational opportunities at a price that people, families in affordable and supportive housing can afford. The third point, and this can be put in a category of brainstorm, and we'll see if people have any reaction, not necessarily today. But the third point is, I think there's conceivably overlap with unarmed response and should be. So I would recommend consideration of a pilot program that trains and compensates designated staff and residents to be first responders in crisis situations. I envision these as part-time, that is a task pursued on occasion as needed while the individuals are spending the majority of their time on other tasks. This role might be characterized as first aid, I'll say as an analogy. It's the grown-up variety of an empathetic ear, a kiss on the scrape, and a Band-Aid when a child is feeling under stress and even crisis. But this would be an unarmed response by someone familiar with the residents, respected by the residents, but it takes some money to train and hire. My concluding comment is on using one-time funds for services. Some would say, oh, you should not do this, Glenn. That's a bad principle. My reply is the pandemic is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and this makes a critical difference how one looks upon it. I'll use an analogy. Suppose I have to have my appendix removed, and I remarked to someone that I was very fortunate to have a one-time tax refund I could use to pay for it. And someone from the accounting department somewhere says, oh, that was a bad idea, Glenn. You should not use one-time funds for a service. I respond, just how many times do you think I'm going to have my appendix removed? The pandemic is a one-time event that we are trying to help people persevere through it and recover from it. Funding from now through the period of 2026 may be exactly what we need for this event we're all unfortunate enough to have to experience. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Glenn. Much appreciated, and absolutely agree. And we have the philosophy of providing supportive services, as you mentioned. Also support an unarmed crisis response team without knowing how that will shake out in the details. I think this is actually a good opportunity to transition and ask Aubrey to introduce herself and talk about the second project, because I think they're so interrelated. They're not really that different from each other, except for one is specifically for chronically homeless households. But within this funding source, the ARPA funds, there is a separate proposal for additional funds for services, and it doesn't, and definitely we could combine them, mix them, however we want to look at it. But we do agree that supportive services should be part of a affordable housing project. Heather, is it okay if we introduce Aubrey?
Yeah, please do.
All right, Aubrey.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for turning it over. Appreciate what's been said so far. And I'll just tell you a little bit. My name is Aubrey Patino. I'm the Executive Director of Avalon Housing. Avalon does what's called supportive housing, which pairs affordable housing with tenancy support services that help people get housed and stay housed. This is an evidence-based intervention for people who tend to experience chronic homelessness. So that means that they've had multiple episodes of homelessness or homelessness for long duration and have a disabling condition in the household. And folks who may have experienced unnecessary institutionalization and tend to cycle between institutional settings and the streets. Using the Housing First model to fidelity and backed by decades worth of evidence nationally as well as success locally, Avalon currently provides supportive housing services to nearly 800 people across Washtenaw County. So we do that in a few different ways. One is in our own housing stock that we've developed, own, manage, and operate, but also in partnership with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission at some of their sites, as well as in the private landlord market, where we're overlaying rent subsidy and working with partners throughout the private landlord market so that we're able to leverage all of these different housing resources to get as many folks housed as possible and continue to make an impact throughout the homeless response sector. We serve in a leadership capacity on supportive housing issues locally, statewide, and nationally. We're active in our local continuum of care, which is the body that oversees the homeless response sector. And we have multiple grants funded through HUD's Hearth Act programs. What we're proposing here is actually, and I appreciate some of what Glenn said because it touches on this, is in support of an application that was submitted to increase the amount of HUD funding that our community receives for supportive housing. So what we are proposing is the ability to acquire a property in partnership with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, and then actually use permanently funded HUD revenue, federal revenue, to pay for the on-site supportive services and the rental assistance. So we're really leveraging these ARPA funds for the property acquisition. What we proposed was a property that might have, say, 4 to 5 units. That property has not yet been identified, but it's something that we would do if these funds became available, and something that we feel like is a viable possibility for us. One of the things that this means for us is that we would provide robust housing-based case management for residents on site, working with them in all areas of their life to help them achieve health and stability for the entire household. And in addition to a traditional case management model, we do really place a high value on community building. So we encourage social connection and linkage to community center activities that we host throughout our tenant communities. We also have an active resident leadership council and other ways that we really try to promote social integration, which agreed is incredibly important now more than ever. Everything that we do is evidence-based, so we use evidence-based practices such as motivational interviewing, assertive outreach, trauma-informed care, housing first, and harm reduction. And we leverage multiple community partnerships to successfully support our residents. Just to speak to the need for this, Jennifer, gave you high-level information about the affordable housing crisis in our community, but more specifically, what we know is that at the end of November of 2021, there were 449 people who were on our county's by name list of people who are experiencing homelessness, including 64 who were experiencing chronic homelessness. Overall, the number of persons served through November of 2021 increased 35% compared to November of 2020. And our county's system modeling report, which was done by the Corporation for Supportive Housing in partnership with the Washington Housing Alliance, showed that 95% of those experiencing chronic homelessness in our community need supportive housing, 40% of non-chronically homeless adults need supportive housing, and 15% of non-chronically homeless families need supportive housing. The length of time from entry into the homeless system to permanently housed has been increasing for those experiencing chronic homelessness due to a lack of new supportive housing availability. Unfortunately, our community has not acquired new HUD funding for supportive housing since 2016. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that our HUD application is as competitive as possible. And we felt that overlaying this use of ARPA funds in this way would help to make us more competitive. Lastly, I'll just say that, we're not the only ones doing this. So I'll uplift an example. Louisville, Kentucky allocated $32 million to supportive housing and $40 million to affordable housing. Kudos to them. And I appreciate you all engaging in this conversation, being here today, and supporting this proposal being brought forward.
Thank you, Aubrey. I'm going to jump to some of the written questions, and because we have several of those stacking up. The first one is actually a comment, which I strongly agree with supportive services. The next question is, what are the plans to make sure that we stop losing affordable housing? That is, that the new housing we create stays affordable permanently?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That is my #1 mission when we do any kind of affordable housing, is to make sure it's permanent. Really, the way to do that is you have to have a government or mission-based nonprofit as the developer, owner, manager of the properties. It is very tough to expect in the private sector to do that because of our strong market. Once they are at the end of their compliance for whatever funding they had for affordable housing, and they look at the marketplace and see that if they convert to market rate, they can charge $300, $400, $500 more a month in rent. They have no reason or incentive to do that. So one of the guidelines for the city's millage funds, for example, is that permanent affordability is a goal. And that means really focusing on mission-based organizations to do that kind of development.
Thanks, Jennifer. The next question is, are there reasons we wouldn't use these funds for services? Like, for example, using one-time money to hire people for positions that are time limited? And I know we've talked a little bit about this already, but Jennifer, anybody else from the team, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't see why we couldn't use these funds for services or combine them with other funds for services. But I also I just realized I should finish my last question. How do you make permanent affordable housing? You do it with a deed restriction, which is what the city has put on all the housing commission properties, and we would put on any other future developments that we do, particularly looking at city-owned parcels that we're looking at developing. Anytime the housing commission would be part of that ownership, we'd want a permanent deed restriction on what that will look like in the future. And I don't really have anything else to add on the services, except that, yes, agreed, needed, and we should figure it out.
All right, and the next question is, are there specific properties being considered? I can find that on the city site. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, as far as this ARPA funds, these two projects, I have a project identified for the larger source of funding, but I cannot provide the address because then it makes it way challenging to acquire it. But it could be sold by the time these funds become available, and we'd have to look for another project. And likewise with this smaller project that we're doing with Avalon, we would, if we get awarded the funds, we would just immediately go out into the marketplace and see what's available and try to acquire a property.
Thanks. This next one is a comment. Agree with Glenn and Trustee Basket. Would point out that from my perspective, through ARPA is a one-time, though ARPA is a one-time funding opportunity, using 24 million on acquiring and building affordable housing would free up some resources from the annual millage to support longer term spending on salaries for social workers, etc. The next question is, the amount of money requested seems to have an enormous range. Is that just because you are hoping to get as much money as possible? Or is there some other explanation? It might be helpful for people to know how much housing would be provided for different amounts of money.
These funds that we're requesting are for the larger project is funds that would leverage other funding sources. I'm just trying to see if I've got a slide that I can show on how that works. Oh yeah, okay. I'm going to share my screen. So when you think about housing development, and this model I'm showing is assuming a acquisition of a vacant parcel and new construction, but it could be anything. There really isn't a lot of difference between the cost of affordable housing versus market rate housing, as far as, you know, you both have to acquire land, you got to hire an architect, you've got to pay for materials. You know, there might be some slight differences in how you're financing it and things like that, but it's going to roughly cost the same amount. The biggest difference is what you're doing with those funds and where your funding sources come from. So this chart shows that on the left, you have a market rate project, and it tends to be about 20%, 10 to 20% equity cash, and the rest as loans, like, you know, like just going to a bank, getting a loan or some other lending source. In the middle, the largest source of financing right now to leverage for these city funds is low-income housing tax credits. And the highest would be about a 60% of median income. You can average it to 60% AMI, but it tends to be the highest income 60% AMI. And so let's say you did a project that was all 60% AMI. You can see that the source of funding flips. And so you end up with a smaller portion, maybe 20, 30% is a loan, And the rest is equity, cash like equity, grant like equity from a investor through this low-income housing tax credit project. As you try to target even lower incomes when you do supportive housing, especially if you do for chronically homeless or homeless households, special needs households, people that are in that much lower income range, then you actually need not just your equity from tax credits, the orange portion that's a loan that you have to pay back. You're going to have what we call the gap, which is in gray, that really needs to be filled with grant-like funds. That gray box is the box that would be the essentially the ARPA funds for a larger project. And so your gap, depending on what you're building, depending on what you're acquiring, your gap could be $1 million, it could be $2 million, but you're leveraging other funds. And so whatever amount ends up, if any, being allocated through ARPA funds, you tend to leverage somewhere between $15 to $25 for every dollar in local funds based on other projects that we've done. So if we had $1 million, we'd leverage $15 to $25 million from other funding sources. How does that translate into units? I mean, roughly you could put $250,000 to $300,000 per unit as a cost, roughly.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yep.
This next one is a comment from Glenn that said, I forgot to say, I strongly support using ARPA funds for the purposes we are discussing in this session. All right, and the next question is, begins with first, thank you so much, Jennifer, for everything that you do. Would the ARPA funds support a homeownership program through the Voucher Program to support low-income disabled Ann Arbor tenants to alleviate the rental market needs in the Ann Arbor area?
We do have already a voucher program that supports homeownership for our tenants that participate in our voucher program who want to do homeownership and are able to do. We have a lot more who want to do that are not able to get a mortgage than those who are able to. We have, I think, 12 families currently who've converted their rental voucher into a mortgage voucher. I haven't looked into ARPA for a home ownership model, but I would be cautious about using ARPA funds for any kind of rent subsidy because of the short term of the expenditure. When the Housing Commission did a lease to own project, we did 57 houses back in the 80s. It often took families much longer than 5 or 6 years to end up being able to get to a point where they could purchase their home. And so that would be a tough model to do with a 5-year window of expenditure.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to jump over to hands raised and then get back to the written comments. And I see the person with the hand raised is Councilmember Griswold. You can go ahead.
I just want to compliment everyone who's involved in this project, and I really appreciate all the data. I was actually a services social worker back in the 70s, and things really haven't changed that much, although there's less funding now. And I just want to mention that the marginalized and the essential workers have really suffered more from the pandemic. And so anything that we can do to help with that recovery, I think should be a top priority. And one question I have is, what's being done at the county level? Have they made decisions yet? And is this similar to any of their programs?
I do not know the answer to that. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. You're 99.9% of the time you have the answer. So I'll go find it out myself. Thanks.
I should know, but I do not know.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Griswold. Okay, the next question is, ARPA funds are supposed to provide support to communities to help the community's most vulnerable and lowest income households. Would the city consider dedicating more money for affordable housing property acquisition and housing for homeless households, like the Kentucky City mentioned?
I don't know if I can answer this for the city because I do not make that decision, but I support it.
I'd be happy to talk, but I cannot activate my camera, Heather. Once again, I don't know. For some reason, Zoom has me on a penalty list and I can't turn my camera on. But we will take a final recommendation to the city council, and it'll ultimately be up to the council how the money is allocated. So, there's a great turnout for this session. I would encourage everybody to fill out the survey that will be available, and to communicate to members of council about your priorities as well, because the mix of programs is very much dependent on the type of feedback that we get during this engagement and what we're hearing from the community.
Thank you, John. And you should be able to activate cameras now for all of you who are on the panel. My apologies, that's an automated setting and I need to make you co-host too, so people can see you. Oh, there you are. Oh, good. I was wondering why everybody had their cameras off. Okay, the next question is, would either of you talk about the intersection between Ann Arbor Housing Commission and Avalon and other issues on the table for these funds, like carbon emissions, social safety nets, and public safety?
Those are a lot of big topics. Well, I can start with the intersection between Avalon and the Housing Commission, in that we're two different legal entities. We're a governmental entity and a public housing commission. Avalon is a private nonprofit. Along with Avalon, we partner with a dozen community partners that are, I see several of them actually are on this, on the participant list. I see Bonnie Billups with Peace Neighborhood Center, who we partner with, similarly with Avalon to provide services on site. Eileen Spring with Food Gatherers. So there's lots of different nonprofits that we do partnerships with, but we're separate legal entities. Did you want to add anything about that, Aubrey? And then what was the second part of the question?
Just a moment, let me scroll back down to it.
I see Krista Gertie also on from Ozone House, who we partner with. I'm trying to see everybody whose names I can figure out who they are.
There's a question, one piece of it was related to safety net funds.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can just speak to the fact that supporting the ARPA allocation for safety net funds does directly impact organizations like Avalon and many of us throughout the homeless response sector in a hugely positive way. We absolutely rely on those funds to have our safety net function. Absent that revenue, we will see reductions in staffing and core services being provided. So I'll speak to that briefly, and Jennifer may want to say more because a number of her partner organizations are recipients of that funding.
Yeah, I agree. And just to call out some more, Rhonda Weathers from SOS, Tish Lee from Legal Services, the Shelter Association. These are all community partners. All of us are on the Continuum of Care. Zach Fossler from Ypsilanti Housing Commission. And this is critical. Like we're kind of different from most housing commissions because we actually do try to serve both the lowest income, most special needs population, hardest to house households. Like I believe that's our mission as a governmental entity. And so we have to partner with local nonprofits in the community to provide those safety net services, whether it's food, whether it's youth services and crisis intervention, community mental health, all of those issues. And so if we did not have that, if we did not have the ability to make those partnerships, we will become like the private sector landlords. And instead of screening people in, we will have to start screening people out because we will not be able to house them.
And I'll just say something a bit bold, which is that while we certainly have people sleeping outside in our community, we don't have massive encampments that you might see in other communities who have less of an affordable housing crisis than ours throughout the state. That is because we have built out a very thoughtful and evidence-driven homeless response sector where we go out of our way to not duplicate services, to work as a collective, to prioritize resources for people who need them the absolute most. And if we chip away at that safety net by loss of funding in this way, we absolutely may see an increase in visible street homelessness and more and more kind of attrition in a lot of the progress that we've made over the last 5 to 10 years. So I don't want to be overly alarmist, but I do want us to be grounded in reality and pragmatic about the fact that this isn't by mistake. This is an act of collective investment that we've made in the safety net that we cannot erode, especially now.
And I just want to call out as well, Jan Little from Michigan Ability Partners, who also is a housing and service provider like we are.
I'll just say one other thing about the question as it relates to carbon emissions. I don't know, I can't speak to the ARPA allocation specifically in that regard, but I will just say that I know both the Ann Arbor Housing Commission and Avalon are doing a lot to build resiliency throughout our housing stock. So working with the city's Office of Sustainability around ensuring that our folks are not dislocated when a climate event happens, that we are able to retrofit existing housing stock, and then are really taking into account how to do new construction in such a way that our new construction is climate resilient. So Jennifer may want to say more about that, but it certainly is a priority of both of ours and something that the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability is supporting us on.
Yeah, I agree. That is not my area of expertise. When I talk to Missy Stoltz about it, I say, Missy, I care about the health of my tenants and our operating costs. So anything that helps that move along and also improves our carbon footprint, I am all for it. So we've been adding solar to our sites. We've been making, highly energy efficiency improvements in the way we design it. We've been doing all electric and basically going off the recommendations of the experts at the city and the sustainability department, which has been a super helpful relationship.
I might add to that also that we have when the federal infrastructure bill was coming together, we put together a fairly comprehensive proposal to solarize our housing commission properties. And the way that bill ended up coming together, we weren't able to have that funded through the earmark process, but we are really hopeful that there are federal programs that resulted from the infrastructure bill that will allow us to piece that program together with federal funding. So you may not see that in the ARPA proposal, but it is definitely a really high priority for staff, and we're seeking funding for those projects now through the federal government.
Thank you. All right, the next question is $150,000 to $300,000 per unit. Is there an average number of people who can live in a unit?
Generally speaking, the programs that we get funded for, the rule is 2 heartbeats per bedroom, which is not the same as a building code. So the city has its own building code requirements for square footage and, windows and whatnot for how many people can live in a particular building. But if you have subsidized rent or you're in like public housing or a voucher program, the maximum is 2 heartbeats per bedroom. But there's also local rules around what do those 2 heartbeats look like. So for us, we say, look, if you have people in 2 generations, or if they're over age 5 and 2 different genders, then we aren't going to count those as 2 heartbeats for a single bedroom. So we're not going to, if you have a grandma and a mom and a 12-year-old daughter and a 8-year-old son, that could end up being a 4-bedroom apartment, not a 2-bedroom apartment.
Thank you. This next is a comment. That'll embarrass you slightly, I'm sure, Jennifer, but Jennifer, it reads, I can't thank you enough for your wealth of knowledge and dedication to supportive housing. You are always kind and willing to listen to the needs of Ann Arbor's low-income residents.
Oh,
Agreed. Okay, and the next question is, will these funds require awardees to have requirements to provide housing first to low barrier shelter? And low barrier shelter, sorry.
Aubrey, do you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, if in partnership with Avalon, everything that we do is predicated on the housing first model. So we always aim to screen in, not out. We don't do things like credit checks, or we're not interested in, yeah, our goal is to house the hardest to house folks. So I don't think there are any concerns there. In terms of formal requirements, I think the city would have to speak to that. Certainly, I know that's how the Housing Commission also operates in practice.
Right, and that is it for our written questions, and I don't see, oh, here comes another one. All right, based on what was said, we have lost 1,000 units of affordable housing over the course of 3 years, and new affordable housing costs are $150,000 to $300,000 per unit. This means we lost $150 to $300 million of affordable housing in this period. This means we need to raise the amount just to keep up. This might be a way to help the public understand the amount of funds we are needed in this area. Might be helpful to total up the affordable housing we've lost in the last 25 to 50 years to give people a sense of the challenge before us.
Yeah, actually, the county has been tracking that. So the chart I showed were recent losses, but they've got maybe we can get the link, if I can find it while we're talking, to the county's website, where you can look by geographic area or total, and you can find houses that have come online and houses that have been lost over time.
Great. All right, and I see that Councilmember Song has her hand up, so just a moment. Oh, you're being promoted to panelist because you're in an older version of Zoom. So anyway, you can ask your question as a panelist.
Great. Hi. Hello. Thanks for organizing this. I'm a former Avalon board member, so and I've been following their work for quite some time. So it's good to see folks who've been committed to do this work throughout the entire experience of homelessness and housing insecurity, and all the support groups show up today. I wanted to ask a little bit about the potential partnerships that I see on the county level, the city level, and actually with schools. So it's really nice to see Trustee Basket here. The schools have a bond. We have ARPA funding. The county has ARPA funding. An example of a project that it would be really interesting to see is what Avalon did in Dexter with housing across from a school. So Aubrey, maybe can you speak a little bit to what that development looked like in Dexter? And maybe Jennifer, if you can speak to if that would be a possibility here in Ann Arbor if we're able to find parcels to meet that need.
Sure. So thanks, Lynn. We have a new development that is nearly finished in Dexter. It's very exciting. It is essentially across the street from the elementary school there. And that was really, the origin of that came from the community inviting us in to develop. They too have had their struggles with affordable housing, and felt like the need was really centered around families. And so we responded accordingly. I think we're always open to development opportunities for all populations who present the need. And we have done new construction for families and work really closely with Ann Arbor Public Schools in various ways. We provide on-site youth programming and have done a lot of work over the years to build relationships. And that's the case as well in partnership with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, where we're an on-site service provider to some of their family sites. So certainly I think there's a strong foundation for us to continue to innovate in that way. There's certainly a need. And I don't know that the amount of money that we're talking about is such that we could get there in terms of actually acquiring a property that was sufficient to meet the need for families. But I'll let Jennifer speak more to that.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to find either vacant land or properties that are family oriented in Ann Arbor, easier when you get outside of Ann Arbor boundaries. We actually have probably the largest number of 4 and 5 bedroom units of any of the housing providers in the community other than single family homes. As far as partnerships, I mean, probably the greatest partnership we have right now is really with the city of Ann Arbor, looking at their underutilized properties, which could be something that could expand to any public entity, whether it's schools, whether it's universities, whether it's, I'm trying to think of all the different religious institutions. Like those are great opportunities because it takes a long time from concept to closing on your financing to put a deal together. And so that's what makes it very hard for us and other nonprofit housing providers to actually compete in the marketplace that we have right now, because you don't normally have a owner who's willing to wait 2 to 3 years while you put your financing together and apply for all these different kinds of braided funding. I know Avalon's done that once or twice, which is kind of a miracle. I have not had to do that yet, thankfully. It's very challenging. And that's what makes the public ownership work so well, because none of them are, have holding costs. There's no taxes being paid. And so you can take more time also to do your community engagement and get the input of the folks in the community, which is what we've been doing with the city-owned sites, that you also usually don't have that kind of time available to you on a private property that you're trying to acquire.
All right, thank you both. The next question is, thank you for these answers. Again, from my perspective, funding for housing homeless households and property acquisition for affordable housing seems to have implications for most all of the other bottom line objectives and the other proposals, i.e. Avalon is better positioned to support affordable housing that is lead-free and energy efficient. Supportive services on this on-site help the community and public safety, moving from being rent burdened to not is, from another angle, a bit of an income boost, etc. Strongly support your work and funding for these projects to the greatest extent possible from these funds. So that's more of a comment. And let's see, the next question is, has the increase of refugee immigrants increased the need for affordable housing in the Ann Arbor area?
I mean, I would imagine so. It hasn't specifically impacted, our housing because we don't have a open wait list currently. And you have to have certain, and I'm not the expert on this, my staff do this, you have to have certain, you'd have to be a US citizen or a certain kind of, green card or some kind of legal status to be able to access the housing we provide. And so that hasn't been something that's intersected with what we're doing so far, but I can't imagine that it is not something that is hard to find right now for those that immigrants.
Thank you. All right, and I see a hand raised by Councilmember Song. All right, you should be able to speak.
I might be able to answer that a little bit. I'm on JFS's board and I know it's been difficult finding housing because families who are being resettled here really need multiple bedrooms. And there are few, if none, very few landlords who have availability to resettle larger families. And I think we're expecting 500 families to be resettled. A number of them are in Wayne County and not Washington County because of programs that can help support their housing needs. We have families in hotels. So I think it's a good challenge for our community when we have signs in our yard saying refugees are welcome here, but we actually don't have a place to welcome them to within our county. So it's some thought that I think we need to collectively put together in coordinating services and funding locally and federally. And I think, you know, another challenge is waiting for folks to have their visa status transition from, so that they can actually be employed locally too. So there's a bit of struggle in actually fully resettling folks. But I'm sure, I think Anya might be, or someone from JHS would be on the call and can give more details too.
I mean, I can just validate that we see the same challenge with folks who are trying to come out of homelessness. The larger unit size is a significant barrier for larger families. And it is part of why, as Jennifer mentioned, some of her units that have those larger unit sizes it's a precious commodity, unfortunately. So that's a barrier that we are all up against. And I think you're right. We really do need to think about how to strategize around that issue.
I should give credit to EMU though. EMU has opened up housing to refugees, and we do have one landlord, Stuart Beal in Ypsilanti, who was able to resettle some folks. So there's some effort, but not as much as I think people assume in our community. Assume how many families are being resettled here.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions? Oh, there's another one that came in. And this says, from food gatherers' perspective, I just want to share that food insecurity and housing insecurity are inextricably linked. Hosting food pantries at Avalon and Ann Arbor housing sites ensures that the food is getting to the folks that need it, and in turn helps people maintain their housing. Okay, any other questions? Here's another one that came in. I think the use of funds is one of the absolutely highest priority uses. This use of funds is one of the absolutely highest priority uses, and hope our community will support giving a generous portion of funds to this use. All right, it appears we're winding up a bit. I'm going to share a couple of slides that just give an overview of the process from here on out. In the meantime, you're welcome, if a question comes to you, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or raise your hand. And if you'll bear with me a moment, I'll share my screen. Just a moment. Okay, so we do have some upcoming meetings. We're winding out a little bit. We're here at Wednesday, January 19th with the Housing for Homeless and Property Acquisition. We do have another meeting later on today at 4, which is focused on fire station number 4, which would be the first net zero fire station in Michigan. And we'll also be talking about solar on city facilities at that meeting. And then tonight at 6 is the City Clerk Election Center. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the Gallup Park Bridge Road and Trail renovation, as well as in the afternoon at 4, the Universal Basic Income and Coordinated Funding Support. So those are the upcoming meetings. Here is the website, the project website, where you can go to find out more information. If you haven't seen it already, there are videos, just short little 2 to 3 minute videos on all of these projects, so you can get a better sense of these projects. And then just more information about the background of the American Rescue Funds. And these videos of these meetings will be posted there. Oops. And then going back, sorry. Oops, I'm looking for here we go. This gives an overview of what's online coming up next. So right now, we are here at holding these community conversations. Prior to this, back in September, October, the projects were identified. So this was the first initial list of projects that came forward that met ARPA funding. And then throughout December and January, it was further refined. Again, all of these had to meet the funding criteria, and as well as being projects that we know that our community supported. Here we are having the series of online gatherings so that you can learn a little bit more about the projects. So we want to make sure that we have this opportunity with you, members of the community, so you have a deeper understanding of the project, so you can help provide some informed feedback about which projects you support being funded. That will come in the form of a survey. So we'll be sending out an electronic survey as well as a paper survey out to people. And basically the question on the survey is where would you put the funding? Which projects would you put the funding towards? So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out soon. From there, it goes to City Council. So all of your feedback will be compiled and provided to City Council, and that'll occur in March. And then once a decision is made, we'll begin implementing the project. So that'll all take place between 2022 and 2026. Again, you can learn more about the projects at the American Rescue Fund's site here. There's also a feature on that site. If you'd like to get email updates, you can plug in your information to that and you'll get emails from the project team. And I see that there are some more questions coming in, so I'll get back to that. Let me stop sharing my screen here. Okay. This one reads, yes, I remain concerned that we could easily spend the funds on things that don't really address racial and economic disparities that we are needing to address in our country. That's a comment. And then this next one is, I like the comment that was said that we see signs saying refugees are welcome here, but no place to welcome them. I find that a little bit sad. And then here's a note on the child tax credit that has expired. So another way to help advocate for our community members is to contact federal reps and encourage that assistance continue. We can also ask state reps to allocate money meant for COVID relief and engage county reps as they begin planning their next tranche of ARPA funding. And here's a comment on the timeline. The timeline seems way hurried to have a real public discussion about our community priorities. If we could delay decisions even by a month or two, it would really help. Doesn't seem like an extra month or two would interfere much with the spending of funds. And John, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure. So the process for kind of a public vetting and public information on this really started back in the fall when the original recommendation of funds was sent to City Council. They directed us to conduct a series of public meetings, which we're doing now. And then, as Heather said, we'll be entering into a survey period and collecting feedback directly to people or directly from people. And then after that, this will be discussed at City Council meetings as well. We'll have a final recommendation. I guess it would be more appropriate to call it a final draft recommendation to City Council by March 1st. And then Council ultimately will decide how the funding is allocated at Council meetings. So, you know, we have the rest of the public meetings that are scheduled here. There will be another public report that goes to Council. There will be at least one more Council meeting where this is discussed. And of course, nothing prevents members of the public from reaching out to staff or to City Council members directly and discussing it with them directly between now and then as well. So, you know, we've wanted to have a very thoughtful public engagement process, and that's what we've tried to put together.
And then the next question is, I believe this has already been discussed, however, wanted to reiterate the need for the criteria for fund use to be as flexible as possible so we can leverage bringing in other federal state resources like LIHTC, MSHDA, and HUD programs, et cetera. Okay, and that's all I'm seeing for written comments and no hands up. Anything else, Jennifer or Aubrey, that you want to put out there?
I don't have anything to add other than thank you for everyone who showed up. We really appreciate your dialogue and support of these projects.
Agreed. Really appreciate this turnout. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do have a request to show the timeline slide one more time, so I'll get that up and running. Oh, and there's a question about how many participants joined us. Right now we have 27, but earlier we had 35 participants. And again, if you go to this website here, a2gov.org/rescue funds, you'll find more information. You can sign up for email reminders or information about this. There's also 2 emails on there, myself and Kayla Coleman. So if you have any other comments that you want to provide or suggestions, you're welcome to email us both. Here's a question. Is there a timeline for the waitlist to open for the voucher or housing program?
We currently have well over 2,000 people on our affordable housing waitlist, as well as our voucher waitlist, 2 different waitlists. So I don't think we'll be opening those for several years. However, we have specialty vouchers and preferences. So we have a homeless preference. So anyone who's homeless, we work with the Continuum of Care and the Housing Access of Washtenaw County, part of that process, so that as we have units or vouchers available that are designated for homeless households, they don't have to go through our normal waitlist process. We also have some other specialty vouchers that we just recently decided to, instead of opening a waitlist for those vouchers, we get phone calls and emails literally every single day from people in the community trying to get on our wait list. So we created a little survey. So as people call, instead of us saying, no, our wait list isn't open and we don't know when it'll be open, we try to find out if they might meet the requirements of our specialty vouchers so that we can get people in right away. And we have 3 different types of vouchers. So we don't want to discourage people from contacting us in case they meet those specialty voucher requirements.
Thank you. And then here's a comment. I hope childcare facilities can be included in funded and housing projects. Lack of childcare is a factor in the ability for parents, usually women, to get better jobs and emerge from homelessness. And then some thank yous from several participants. I also want to note that Amanda Carlisle put in the link to the county site. So you should see that in the question and answers if you're looking for that. That's the county dashboard that Jennifer referenced.
Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, so we'll hang out here for a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any. But otherwise, if you don't, we really appreciate you attending, and we really sincerely appreciate the opportunity to discuss all of this with you. We do want to make sure that people have a good understanding of the projects that are being proposed, so you can make informed responses to us about what your preferences are for the funding. And then here's a comment. I would hope that members of our homeless community with criminal records that are normally excluded from housing could be considered for some of the units.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
And here's a hand raise. Go ahead, Greg. You should be able to talk.
I'm sorry, I did not have a question. I hit the wrong thing.
Oh, that's okay. I know how that goes. No problem. All right, again, we'll hang out just a few more moments. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, just in case something comes to somebody, we'll hang out here for a few more minutes. But otherwise, again, we thank all of you for attending. I think you came in. Thank you. We appreciate that. And another thank you. Thank you for your thank you.
I'd just like to offer Aubrey, if you want to join the Mission to Focus group on ARBA home funds, I will hold down the fort. We both have a meeting that started at
Thanks.
1.
All right. Thanks all. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey. Yeah, and I think we'll give this to 20 after. I have 1:18 right now, so we'll give it a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. All right, my clock has reached 20 after, so I think we can draw this to a close. Again, we thank all of you who joined us today and all of you who stuck around for these last few minutes while we waited for any other questions to come in. Again, we really do appreciate you engaging with this and having a strong interest on this topic and ARPA funds in general. Please stay tuned. Again, please, you can go to this website here if you want to sign up for email updates. We encourage you to do that. There is also a phone number that's on that site that you can use if you'd rather call and talk to somebody. And again, thank you. And we look forward to, if you join us at any of the future meetings, we look forward to hearing from you more then.
Thank you for hosting, Heather.
Yes, happy to.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone.